At the 2004 Oscars, The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King absolutely swept the event, winning Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Directing, Best Makeup, Best Music both for the original score and an original song, Best Sound Mixing, Best Visual Effects, Best Writing for an Adapted Screenplay, and Best Picture. However, none of these awards are more indicative of its greatness and its success than its final Oscar, Best Editing. The Lord of the Rings trilogy has always been defined by its massive scale, and Peter Jackson's mastery of this shows itself in the whole trilogy, but becomes especially apparent in The Return of the King, as all the characters of the Fellowship embark on their own separate quests. Frodo and Sam journey to Mordor to destroy the ring, Gandalf and Pippin help to defend the city of Minas Tirith, and Aragorn, Merry, Legolas, and Gimli ride with the Rohirrim to bring back support to Minas Tirith. If that already seems like a lot of plot and names to keep track of, then prepare yourself, as simultaneously, the Witch King of Angmar and his army march out of Minas Morgul to further attack Minas Tirith, orc armies finally conquer the city of Osgiliath, leaving Minas Tirith completely exposed, Aragorn's elf fiancé Arwen begins to literally die, and in an effort to save her and the rest of Middle-earth, her father Elrond reforges the sword that once wounded Sauron. Aragorn gets given this sword and then separates from the Rohirrim to travel to the Paths of the Dead to convince the ghosts that live there to fight against Sauron's army, and to top it all off, the Steward of Gondor, Denethor, goes completely insane and attempts to burn him and his son alive before jumping to his death. And all of that is just to set up the battle for Minas Tirith, which ends with an hour left in the film. So the question becomes, how does Jackson manage the vast scale of the film without confusing the audience? And the answer is simple, with editing. Peter Jackson and editor Jamie Selkirk put on a masterclass of film editing in Return of the King, as each storyline is edited as its own film with unique pacing and tone appropriate for its action, while simultaneously being interwoven with the others through visual and audible cues that demonstrate their connected goals and how each story impacts the others. While Jackson's editing and the screenplay are partly responsible for this mesh of storylines, it is Jamie Selkirk's transitions between shots that truly sells these separate stories as one cohesive epic. One of the best examples of this comes in a sequence 39 minutes into the film, as Gandalf explains the extent of Sauron's army to Pippin. As he begins describing the Witch King, the film uses his words as a guide for when to cut to the Witch King, both in the present and to a flashback of him in the past, allowing the audience to seamlessly jump between time and space without confusion. Selkirk continues with this trend, as when Gandalf describes Minas Morgul, he cuts directly to Frodo and Sam, who are present there, connecting the separate arcs both spatially and thematically. As the scene progresses, Selkirk is able to establish a more concrete spatial connection between the two arcs, as he intercuts between the pillar of light that erupts from Minas Morgul and Gandalf's reaction in Minas Tirith, which not only establishes how far along on their journey Frodo and Sam are, but also gives the audience their first indication of how close the army of Sauron is to Osgiliath, the last defense of Minas Tirith. As the plot lines merge, Selkirk continues to use common points to demonstrate how they interact, and makes perfect use of the visual iconography Peter Jackson filmed to anchor the audience and help them understand the film's quick cuts. Another great example of Selkirk's editing comes when Faramir returns defeated from Osgiliath and informs Gandalf that Frodo and Sam are taking the road of the Morgul Vale. Gandalf becomes visibly worried and demands Faramir to tell him everything. Building off the intrigue and worry that Gandalf has created in the audience, Selkirk immediately cuts to Frodo and Sam, which adds to the suspense of their treacherous journey, while also directly connecting the two storylines once again. As an interesting side note, this cut is removed from the extended version of the film, and these two scenes are separated by an unrelated exchange between Faramir and his father, which ultimately results in a loss of suspense, proving the power of Selkirk's original cut. While many of his best and most impactful cuts are between Frodo's story and the other arcs, Selkirk does a lot of trench work to depict the opposing armies of Sauron and Aragorn. When cutting between the two, Selkirk often uses a visual or audio match to cut between the armies. However, this initial match gives way to the completely different colors and tones each army is depicted in. One of the more obvious manifestations of this comes a little over an hour in, as Selkirk contrasts the orc squealing siege weapons traveling from screen left to right, with an equally squeaky cart moving from right to left, revealing the Rohirrim behind it. This simple choice not only transitions between the two armies, but directly opposes the forces of good and evil. Selkirk's use of connections and contrasts allows for the diverse and often diverging plotlines present in the film to interact and share importance before they officially merge in the plot, allowing for the creation of an interlocking web of story that facilitates the grand feeling of the film. There has arguably never been a film to have such a grand scale before or after the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it was this, along with Jackson and Selkirk's management of it, that propelled it not only to win Best Editing and Best Picture in 2004, but to also be considered one of, if not the best fantasy film of all time.